Learner autonomy has long been considered a central goal of higher education. Universities worldwide often claim to foster autonomy in their students, presenting it as a key graduate attribute. But what does learner autonomy really mean, and can it truly be assessed within formal academic programs? In this video, we'll explore the complex and sometimes contradictory nature of learner autonomy, why it's so highly valued, and the challenges educators face when trying to measure it. Let's begin by understanding why autonomy is seen as so important in higher education. For decades, educational theorists have argued that autonomy is not just one goal among many, but a characteristic that underpins all other skills and beliefs developed in higher education. The ability to take charge of one's own learning is seen as essential for lifelong learning and adaptability in a rapidly changing world. As such, universities often embed autonomy into their program outcomes and assessment frameworks. However, despite its prominence, the concept remains elusive and difficult to pin down, leading to confusion among educators and students alike. One of the biggest challenges in assessing learner autonomy is the lack of a clear, shared definition. While most educators agree on its general importance, there is little consensus on what it actually means. Some see it as independence, others as self-regulation, and still others as a set of attitudes or behaviors. This diversity of interpretations makes it difficult to create standardized assessments or learning outcomes that accurately reflect autonomy. As a result, the term is often described as an essentially contested concept, one that is debated but never fully resolved. Terms independent learning and autonomous learning are often used interchangeably, but they are not quite the same. Independent learning typically refers to a process where the learner takes responsibility for their own learning, often within a structured environment provided by a teacher or institution. Autonomous learning, on the other hand, implies a greater degree of freedom, where the learner sets their own goals and determines the direction of their learning. This distinction is crucial when considering how, or if, autonomy can be assessed in formal education. University programs are typically highly structured, with prescribed curricula, assessment deadlines, and specific learning outcomes. While students may have some flexibility in how they approach their studies, the content and timing are largely determined by the institution. This structure limits the extent to which students can truly exercise autonomy, as they cannot fully decide what, how, or when to learn. As a result, the claim that universities develop fully autonomous learners is open to question. Educational theorist Philip Candy outlined 6 aspects of autonomy: freedom of choice, independent goal setting, capacity for reflection, self-mastery, perseverance, and a personal sense of autonomy. While these aspects help clarify what autonomy might look like, they are difficult to translate into accessible criteria within a university framework. For example, how can an assessor determine if a student has truly acted independently or exercised self-mastery, especially when institutional constraints are always present? Is autonomy something students achieve as a final product, or is it an ongoing process of development? Some theorists argue that autonomy is a process. Students work towards becoming more autonomous, but may never fully arrive. Others see it as a product, an end goal to be reached. This distinction matters for assessment. If autonomy is a process, perhaps we should focus on students' progress rather than trying to measure a fixed outcome. In traditional education, the teacher directs what is to be learned, how, and when. In autonomous learning, the student takes on much of this responsibility. However, even in higher education, teachers still provide structure, guidance, and assessment. This means that, while students can develop some autonomy, they are rarely fully autonomous within the constraints of a formal program. The teacher's role shifts from director to facilitator, but the boundaries remain. David Little's work helps clarify the difference between autonomy and directed independent learning. While both involve reflection and independent action, only autonomous learners determine the purpose and content of their learning. In university programs, students' learning is shaped by disciplinary boundaries, institutional requirements, and external accreditation. This means that at best, students can become more autonomous but not fully autonomous within these frameworks. Despite these challenges, universities can still play a role in helping students develop autonomy. Some theorists believe autonomy must be taught and learned, while others see it as innate. Activities that encourage students to make choices, reflect on their learning, and take responsibility can foster autonomy, even if it cannot be fully assessed. The key is to focus on growth and development, rather than on achieving a fixed standard. If autonomy is a process, should universities attempt to assess it at all? Some argue that the focus should be on promoting practices that encourage autonomy, rather than trying to measure it directly. Others suggest that assessment is necessary to motivate students to value autonomy. However, as soon as autonomy becomes an assessment criterion, Students may simply perform the behaviors they think assessors want to see, rather than genuinely acting autonomously. Consider a student who, at the start of their degree, is given a prescribed reading list. By the final year, they are expected to identify their own sources for a research project. This shift demonstrates a move towards greater autonomy, but it is only one aspect. Similar progressions can be seen in lab work or group projects. While these experiences help students become more autonomous, they do not necessarily mean that full autonomy has been achieved or can be assessed. A major problem arises when students know their autonomy is being assessed. They may simply mimic autonomous behaviors to satisfy assessment criteria, rather than genuinely taking charge of their learning. This undermines the authenticity of any assessment of autonomy. True autonomy must be self-initiated, not a response to external requirements. This paradox makes authentic assessment of autonomy nearly impossible within formal education. Given these challenges, should universities continue to claim that they develop and assess learner autonomy? Some experts argue that, until clearer definitions and workable assessment methods are available, universities should focus on supporting the development of autonomy rather than trying to measure it. The goal should be to help students become more autonomous over time, rather than to judge whether they have achieved a fixed standard. In summary, learner autonomy remains a key aspiration in higher education, but its definition and assessment are fraught with difficulties. While universities can encourage students to become more autonomous, the authentic assessment of autonomy within formal programs is highly problematic. The focus should be on fostering environments and practices that support autonomy, allowing students to grow and take increasing responsibility for their learning. Ultimately, autonomy may be better seen as a journey rather than a destination.